Good morning. This is the Blaine's World webcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and get more information and listen to previous shows at our website, which is behind me, blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield. I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Ed Treat and Tracey Gruver, both from Pisgah Legal Services. And guys, you can feel free to wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this. So there you go. Okay. I should mention that Ed Treat is a staff attorney at Pisgah Legal Services, where he provides free explanation, expunction, and driver's license restoration services. He's a New York City boy and volunteered as a variety of criminal justice settings while enrolled at Brooklyn Law School. After graduating and passing the New York bar, he served for 3 years as assistant district attorney in the Kings County DA's office, and then for 2 years with the Office of the Special Narcotics Prosecutor for the City of New York. After moving to Asheville, he was admitted to the North Carolina bar and joined Pisgah in 2021. Tracey is a nonprofit fundraising professional as the legacy giving officer at Pisgah Legal Services. She has worked in nonprofits since 2019, and prior to that, she taught high school English for 11 years. So I find that hard to believe. You started what, at the age of 7 or 8 when you started
That's
teaching?
right. Exactly, Blaine.
Youngest high school teacher ever.
I was
Tracy,
very precocious.
it seems that Tracy, and still is, Tracy was raised in Ohio, has called North Carolina her home for 22 years. So the first thing I do, Ed, especially when I meet somebody for the first time, is I kind of ask about your background. And you mentioned, you and I were talking that you're from New York City originally. You grew up as a kid in New York City. Did you always know you wanted to work for a nonprofit legal firm?
Absolutely not. I thought I was going to go into medicine for many years. A lot of my extended family are in medicine. I got to freshman orientation at college at Stony Brook University a long, long time ago, and I started looking at the prereqs for pre-med, and I decided that it was definitely not for me because it was way too much science and math. And then actually, I didn't come to the law until fairly late. I did not go to law school until I was almost 30. But it was just something that people with my educational background in liberal arts, history, English, that kind of thing often gravitate to. And so I ended up there. Didn't really think about doing work like this right out of law school, to be perfectly honest with you. I wanted to do criminal law. And as you mentioned, I started with the district attorney's office in Brooklyn, which I did that for about 3 years and then moved on to other prosecutorial roles.
So in between, I guess, college graduated Stony Brook and the law work you did, what else had you done?
So I actually worked for a big corporate law firm in New York City. I didn't do anything that was specifically related to the practice of law. I did basically administrative work, logistics, purchasing, and supplies. It was with a huge law firm in New York called Debevoise in Plimpton. It was a fantastic place to work in that they really treated everyone from the senior most partners to the guys working in the mailroom really well. And they have a great reputation for just being good people. And it was a fantastic job, and I had never intended to stay for more than a summer or two so I could get out of my parents' house and pay rent. But it was such a good job with such good benefits, and they were such good human beings that I ended up staying nearly a decade and never really saw myself doing that kind of law, even once I went to law school. Having seen what corporate law looked like up close, I decided it wasn't really for me, but it was just a good work environment. It was almost like a family even though it was a big international law firm, with leading lawyers doing very high profile work, they really treated everyone very well. And it made a strong impression on me and how they really tried to treat everybody equitably.
Very nice. And so the question that everybody then asks, so what got you from New York City to Asheville, North Carolina?
So I have no real family connection to the area originally. Um, when my second daughter was born, my wife and I basically realized we could not fake it anymore in New York City. It was enough to have one child sleeping in a closet, but two was going to be too much, and we just decided we were ready to start over. I was pretty tired of the practice of law after 5 years in New York City, after 5 years of criminal prosecution. I think my wife was a little tired of her job. She did have family members who had relocated to Asheville years ago, but she's originally from the New York area as well. So, it was just sort of a place we'd come for vacations, that sort of thing, and always loved it. And the second child was just the impetus to say, let's try something completely different. Let's make a clean break with New York and really get a fresh start. And we always loved the area, and we still do. I think it's probably about the smartest thing I ever did was to move here, because I absolutely love it.
And it's funny, your background is not dissimilar to mine and a lot of other folks that actually when we moved to Asheville 20 years ago, I guess, we knew nobody, and the only person we knew, we were talking about it off the air, was my friend Tom Gallagher, who used to work for Pisgah. And so it's so funny that the tie-in with Pisgah, and we knew Tom, and
Mhm.
he wasn't working for Pisgah at the time, but he came on board at Pisgah then, and that was the first job in the Asheville area with Pisgah.
Yeah, yeah, I did some volunteer work, but as I mentioned, I was a stay-at-home dad for a couple years because I really wasn't interested in practicing law anymore. Really tried to start different careers even, and nothing really got off the ground. I came to Pisgah kind of reluctantly even, and again, I can't. I'm sorry it took me so long because I've never worked with a better group of people. It's a fantastic place to be.
And lastly, it's kind of cool you were saying about the environment you had in New York City. But it almost, I get the feeling, and you or Tracy can address it, but Pisgah is sort of, I guess, a little bit, or I hope it's like that too. It's kind of a family environment. It's not typical, high-powered legal attorneys, with big bucks. So I just think it's great you came on board. And so, Tracy, I'll ask you the same series of questions. So you grew up again where? In Ohio, was it? Or no, in
Yeah,
Ohio?
no, Northwest Ohio, very rural area, right in between Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Toledo, Ohio.
Okay. And so, which is kind of interesting. So, you, like me, have been a school teacher in Ohio. And what had you taught there?
So I actually did all of my teaching, or most of my teaching, in Alamance County, North Carolina,
Okay.
which is, in the Piedmont area. And yeah, I did about 10 years of teaching there, and then I did 1 year of teaching when I moved to Asheville, and then I changed careers after that.
And so, what had you taught?
All high school English. So I taught grades 9 through 12 at different times.
Okay. And that's kind of a big shift then from being a high school English teacher to all of a sudden working for a non-profit, and especially a legal nonprofit. What made
Yeah.
that switch?
It's actually a lot more similar than you would think, because a lot of my job is really just like telling people what we do at Pisgah Legal. And once I tell them about what we
Interesting.
do, then they often want to support us. So it's a lot of like presenting to small groups or large groups and telling them what we do, which is very much like being in front of a classroom. So it's actually very similar.
Interesting. And then I like how you said it too, telling them what you do as opposed to telling them off. That's a nice
Yeah.
way of saying that, even though you never tempted to tell people off, of course. But so
Well, I'm not from New York City, so I have a little bit of a different.
so with Pisgah then, you're primarily involved in the fundraising aspect of Pisgah?
Yes, yes, that's my job. We are a nonprofit organization, so we have to fundraise our entire budget every year, between grants and individual donations, corporate donations, that sort of thing.
And unfortunately, and we may talk about this a little bit, but unfortunately, I guess the nature of your job or the whole thing is changing a little bit in terms of support you get from the government. It was always
Yeah,
a
I think
battle. Yeah.
we've seen that across the nonprofit sector. A lot of organizations are being faced with funding cuts from federal, state, and local levels, and we don't know if that's going to be better or worse next year, in the years following. So we're really looking at, going forward, having to look to, private foundations more for help, and individuals and businesses more for help, in order to keep being able to serve as many people as we do, because we serve about 25,000 people a year at Pisgah Legal. And with the cuts that we're seeing in government funding and in, some other sources, we'll probably have a reduction of about 5,000 people less served if we were to go forward with these funding cuts and not just like fundraise the rest of that.
And so even for 2025, has your budget been affected yet, or that'll happen in the future?
We're okay for 2025, but 2026 is where we're looking at, some significant cuts.
Okay. And so I guess you'll have to rev up those bake sales and cookie sales to make up a difference.
Yes, all the ways that we raise money, every way. We're going to be out there hitting the pavement a lot harder than we usually do.
And we'll talk about it. So I don't know if that's why Ed was hired initially, but Ed, are you a good baker also, or do you do cookies
I'm
and
a
things?
terrible baker.
Oh,
But I can show up and tell heartwarming stories, and people seem to like that. So I'm always happy to do that.
okay, that'd be great. So back to Tracy. So so Pisgah helping raise funds. And if I could just ask you briefly, Tracy, to talk about some of the different kinds of things Pisgah does, and we'll tell you what it
Sure.
typically does. But Pisgah does what,
Sure.
about 27 different things or 28, a lot of different things.
We have 17 different programs.
We're
So
close
yeah,
enough. Yeah.
more than I have time to tell you all about right now. But I can just hit some of the highlights. We do housing work, and in that area, we help people who are being faced with evictions and foreclosures, and help them to have representation in the courtroom and help them to navigate those processes. We also help with domestic violence cases, so helping people get protective orders, helping people to deal with custody issues that come in a domestic violence situation. We do some immigration work, helping people who have a legal path to citizenship to navigate that complex system that exists. And of course, right now we're doing a lot in disaster recovery. So people who need help with FEMA appeals, help with insurance claims to get money to rebuild their homes. So we've been doing a lot of that since the hurricane last September.
And by the way, keep in mind, and we've talked about this in the past. So if and when in the future we want to talk about some of these other programs, let me know,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
we've done shows on
Absolutely.
them. But
Yeah, and what we're
yeah.
here to talk about today, Ed's program is super important, very impactful work, driver's license restoration and expunction, and he'll be able to tell you all the details about that work.
And so one of the things I'm hearing you say is that it's kind of an evolving job, I guess, what you do, what Pisca does, because
Hmm.
these things you just mentioned, some of them weren't even in existence, 5 years ago, or
That's
what's
right.
very sad, especially immigration work has taken off, or
Hmm.
all these other things. So I guess it's always changing,
Yeah, when I started in January of 2024, we had 15 programs,
right?
and since then we've added two other programs. So it is an evolving place to work. The work is always changing. The needs that people have in the community are always changing and evolving. So we have to kind of evolve with that and be there to help people with whatever legal needs they have.
And one other question, if I can, in terms of the people you serve. So Pisca Legal Services is primarily geared for what kind of folks?
So we serve the low income folks in our area. And when I say low income, what I mean is that they have to be at or below 125% of the poverty line for most of our programs. It does change a little bit from program to program depending on funding. But the average household income for our folks last year was about $17,000. So you're looking at very low income folks. About 75% of our clients are women. And then, we also try to prioritize in most of our program areas, we try to prioritize households that have children as well. Because we feel like they have kind of a higher level of need if they have children in the house. So very low income folks that we're serving.
And one of the things I guess that you're doing today, I'm really glad you're on the show, is the fact that a lot of people still don't know about Pisca, or they have to be made
Right.
aware of them because like the low income, they don't have access even to 24/7 internet or, whatever.
Hmm.
So somehow they have to find out about you, and we'll talk about that in a second. But let me turn to you so that your program that you're pronouncing, um, is that a new program with Pisca or has that always been there?
So yes and no. So prior to when I started in January of 2021, there was an expunction program. The woman who was doing that work had left the firm before I started to work for a nonprofit in Charlotte, but she only did expunction part-time because frankly, until that point, coincidentally, there was very little meaningful relief available under the law. I happened to come on board after North Carolina had passed what was known as the Second Chance Act that greatly expanded eligibility. So I didn't realize any of that when I started. But far more people had become eligible to get expunctions in terms of what offenses were eligible, how long you had to wait, what you had to do. So North Carolina was really going through a lot of change at that point and still is. And it was a very exciting time where the work was being done before and a lot of good work was being done before. But we now have far more than we can handle in terms of capacity, and we are able to do much more in terms of really getting a lot of stuff off of people's records, which is wonderful. And the work is different now, I would say, for the better. License restoration, the other half of what I do, was not something that Pisgah did a lot of before I started. I think it had been done a little bit piecemeal here and there by attorneys, just trying to help a client with an issue they didn't know much about. And I think Pisgah just kind of decided, well, Ed's going to do expunctions halftime, and he can do license restoration the rest of the time. It was a real learning experience for me and for Pisgah and for our partners. But we found that work to be even more in demand than expunction, if that's possible, and incredibly transformative for people like our clients.
And if you can, Ed, kind of will talk about both parts of that, but for the benefit of the folks who don't know what expansion is, if I can turn that over to you, and if you keep it
Sure.
under like 2 hours or something, we can
Sure.
highlight
So
expansion.
expunction, as you can imagine, is in a pretty obscure corner of the
Right,
law. I joked that when I interviewed for the position at Pisgah, the first thing I had to do was look it up and see what it was
right.
because I had no experience doing it. The laws vary state to state, and I really did not know that it was a thing, frankly. But basically, all it is criminal record clearance. It's as simple as that, where a charge is either deleted from your record, and all records in public records are removed related to that, or it is sealed and hidden from most people. So it basically, when you get an expunction, you are restored to the status that you held before that. It's like that never happened. And if that happens, you could, in theory, be under oath and be asked, were you arrested for so and so? Were you convicted of so and so? And you could legally, and without committing perjury, say, no, that never happened. All
Yeah.
right. So you don't have to disclose it on a background check and so on and so forth.
How does it tie into voting rights?
It actually does not have a tremendous impact on voting rights in North Carolina, fortunately, in that folks do not typically permanently lose voting rights
Okay.
in North Carolina felony convictions. There's a limited time bar, but once a certain period of time passes, you can vote again as a felon. And so I do get those inquiries, and mostly the answer is actually you don't need to get an expunction for that, right? It's actually not going to impact that, but it does impact almost every other aspect of life, all your basic needs.
And to mention it, like, just highlight some of those other areas that are
So the
impacted.
most obvious one that we see in our area is both housing and employment. Fortunately, with the labor market usually being what it is, you can get a job in West North Carolina with a criminal record. You're going to have a real ceiling for sure. But housing is a major, major barrier. There's an affordable housing crisis in this area that has been exacerbated by the hurricane. And in this day and age of information, any mom and pop landlord, certainly a big corporate landlord, is going to run a background check. And if you are competing for scarce limited housing resources and the landlord has the option between you with a criminal record and somebody else without one, you are probably out of luck, right? And that is a huge, huge issue for our clients who can barely afford to live here in the first place, regardless of their records.
And so once you go through the process, then you don't even have to say that. It's completely, you're starting from afresh when you go for,
Right. If it works the way it's supposed to, if that same landlord or employer or whatever were to run a background check on you, that charge would not appear. The judge waves their magic wand and it's gone. It's really transformative and powerful when it happens. It's long. It's not something that people can navigate without an attorney in most cases. But when it does happen, it is wonderful and really moving for clients.
it must be very exciting for you as the person working with these folks to have them. It's almost like, it almost sounds like the citizenship thing, when you get a become a
Yes.
citizen, but it's almost like the
Yes.
same kind of thing that people must be blown away when they go through this.
That's funny you say that, in that I would compare my program most closely with immigration. And it's very different in some ways. I don't know anything about immigration law, but the process is very long. It's a lot of paperwork. It's very difficult to navigate. It's frustrating for people. It's very discouraging. It would be very expensive without Pisgah Legal. The private bar charges thousands of dollars for expunctions like they do for immigration work. But yes, when you get to that finish line, it is very much just a transformative moment. Expunction clients in particular talk about it as a sense of redemption, as having a tremendous weight lifted off of them, and just sort of even where it's maybe not causing a specific barrier at that point, it's so meaningful on almost a spiritual level for clients in a way that I think is maybe not easy to understand if you haven't had to live with that stigma for years.
And on the process, if you would just describe what happens. So somebody contacts, calls Pisgah, or gets in touch, and we'll talk about how you do that. They get in touch with Pisgah, and you get assigned to, I guess, clerical help or whatnot, eventually works way to your desk. And how long, what happens then? You interview them, you do paperwork. How long does it take?
Yes. So the most important thing to do is obviously to talk to the client to get a sense of the barriers that they're facing. We try to take a holistic approach where we have many clients who actually approach us for expunction, and then when we talk to them, we say, you know what? Actually, that's not really what you need. There's another way around the barrier that you're facing, or expunction is just not going to work for you. But assuming it is actually the way we're going to go, we're going to take a real deep dive into their record, which is time consuming and difficult despite the information age that I spoke about earlier, there is no one single reliable source of criminal records in North Carolina, let alone nationwide, and we need to look at all of that. So we spend a lot of time combing through records, kind of investigating, speaking with the client, trying to make sure we have everything. If we don't see a charge, if we don't find a charge, we cannot expunge it. That is harder than you would think when you have clients whose records go back years, who maybe, particularly with women who may have undergone several name changes through marriages and divorces and those sort of things. We have to find all of that. Also, North Carolina only had digital records, even in a very basic form, into the 1980s. So there's decades and decades of paper records that we need to be concerned about. It's very time consuming. We need to feel confident that we have a full record. Once we have that, we apply the law to it. We determine, all right, you have this conviction, you have this conviction, what can be expunged, what can't. Unfortunately, a big part of my job, and one of the hardest parts of my job, is telling people, I'm sorry, you really deserve a second chance, but the law is not going to permit you to get one. There are strict limits on what can be expunged and what cannot. Some of them are pretty commonsensical, some of them are not. The kind of crimes that we would consider more serious often cannot be expunged. Violent crimes, that kind of thing, which I think is, understandable. But a lot of my job is telling people, I'm sorry. I can tell you've really tried to give yourself a second chance, but this is not going to work for you. And at that point, we're going to see what else we can do, whether it's connecting them to another organization that's going to help place them in a good job despite their record, whether we're going to help them try to find affordable housing despite their record. And that's very, very important in that otherwise, unfortunately, a lot of what I would be doing is telling people, sorry, the legislature doesn't see fit for you to get a second chance.
And at ballpark, in terms of this part of your job, how many clients do you serve, or last year, how many clients went through the process?
Um, Way too many, frankly. I have some of the highest caseloads in the firm, and I've really been working to get that down. I mean, I would say I typically have between, 100 and 160 cases open at any one time. Probably half of those are expunctions. Many of those are just sort of in a holding pattern, but the demand is endless. I foolishly thought I would have to go out and sort of drum up business to justify my existence, not realizing that with the changes in the law that I mentioned, I was going to be drinking from a fire hose. In that 1 in 5, maybe 1 in 4, it's hard to say, North Carolinians have some form of criminal record.
Wow.
And it's a single digit percentage of that who ever even try to get an expunction. So we are only beginning to meet the demand or even, make people aware that this may be available to them. There are people who tried 10 years ago prior to the law change and were told no, they may be eligible now. There was actually just another change to the law, and I had to call a couple clients back and say, I know I told you you couldn't, but they just changed the law. Good news, you can. So we have more work than we will ever do. And unfortunately, there are very, very few attorneys anywhere in North Carolina doing this work free of charge like we do. So
So,
the demand is never gonna be met.
so just ballpark last year, how many people went through the process and got records expunged?
Uh, it's hard to say. I would estimate a few dozen
Okay.
got meaningful relief. Again, there were many more who I looked at the record and said, I'm sorry, there's not too much I can do. I can give your record a haircut, but you're not getting the felony off that you really wanted. And we're mostly limited to Buncombe County, unfortunately. But Pisgah does serve a much bigger area, so there is endless demand out there that needs to be addressed.
And one last thing Tracy had mentioned, and we mentioned in the introduction, so that's kind of part of your job. Another part, which I'm not familiar with, involves driver records. And what do you do with respect to driver records?
So, yes, so expunction and driver's license restoration often fall under the umbrella of what's referred to as second chance law.
Right.
And they're very different areas of the law, but frankly, it's often a lot of the same people. I often have a client come to me for expunction, and then I'm looking at their record and I say, you have a lot of charges for driving without a license. Do you have a driver's license? And folks who are going to struggle with justice involvement are often going to struggle with getting their license suspended. It's not why folks go to prison. It's not what really gets them in trouble, but it's almost sort of a collateral consequence where if you're struggling with addiction, if you're struggling with mental health issues, you are not in a position to address little things like a speeding ticket. Unfortunately, those things fall by the wayside. And what I see is when clients are doing what they need to do, when they're being accountable, when they get clean, when they come home from prison, when they're trying to put their lives back together, so to speak, that's often the last piece is I lost my license years ago and I don't even know where to start. So we get a lot of referrals from agencies doing substance abuse recovery, doing reentry work. We have a great partnership with Buncombe County government where they refer people to us who are in their specialty programs. And again, these are people who've worked tremendously hard on their sobriety, on their mental health issues, all their issues, whatever those are. And then this is sort of what's going to put them over the top and let them get that better job and let them get better housing and all those things that they need.
So again, too, is that equally a cumbersome process, or does that take a long time as well?
It can. Sometimes it is a lot quicker than expunction. Once in a while, I get a client record, and all it comes down to is they owe some money to DMV or to a court somewhere, and we can, in some cases, fortunately, even help them pay that, and they can go to DMV, as soon as that clears. Others do turn into a really extensive process. Sort of, it's one of those things where you get into trouble and it compounds itself because you continue to drive without a license or you continue to be unable to pay all these ridiculous fines and fees and you dig yourself a deeper hole. So the longer you sort of, been digging and the longer it's going to take you to get out. And I do have license restoration clients that I've been working with for years. DMV never tells anyone you can never drive again. There's no such thing as a lifetime ban, which I was surprised at, frankly. But what effectively happens is that people get so stuck and it's such a quagmire and they have such limited resources that they give up and effectively never drive again. And I do get clients who have not driven in decades, which is
I,
amazing.
I guess that's part of the problem, and we'll come back to Tracy on this, is that unfortunately, I guess a lot of people don't know about this, it's very sad when you think about it. So you lose your license or you get stopped or whatever, and you go through the court system, whatever, and then you just don't know what to do afterwards. I guess unfortunately, and I'll ask Tracy this, court systems don't, I guess, typically notify folks about Pisgah. Is that
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Blaine. And I think our organization has been around for almost 50 years. So a lot of people do know about us. They just don't always think about all the things that we do, right? They know that we're here. They know we represent people in court. I think there's often a misunderstanding that people think that we represent clients in criminal cases. We don't do that. We only do civil work. And so there's just so many things that people don't think to call us for. And so whenever I get questions on social media or out in the community, hey, could you help me with this? I'm like, honestly, I don't know. Call the number or get on the website and fill out the application because we do so many things that there could be a litany of things that we could help you with. And so often a huge part of my job is literally just talking to people every single day about what we do, about how they can get help. And that way, even if you don't need help from us, if you meet somebody who has an issue, you can say, hey, Pisgah Legal's in town, call this number. And, it never hurts to just call and ask, can you help me with this? Because very often we can. And then there are a million things we can't. So it's just a good idea to call and check.
Just remind folks that we're talking with Ed Treat and Tracey Gruver with Pisgah Legal. And Tracey, you were mentioning the fact that Pisgah is good for helping people from a civil standpoint as opposed to a criminal standpoint, but sometimes the two overlap. Is that correct? That you can have, I know Pisgah in particular has helped many abused folks when they've had, I guess, their criminal issues involved, but there are also civil issues involved as well.
Yes, when there's a domestic violence situation, of course, the person who is in the position of abuser, that's a criminal act. But we would not represent them in that criminal case. They would be represented by, I'm sorry, Ed, remind me what it's
The
called.
public defender's office.
Thank you. I don't know why my mind just went blank there. Um, and so we would represent the victim in that situation if they needed help getting a protective order, because that's a civil issue in court.
Okay, so but you then, so if they come to you, and what's like Ed was saying before, if you can't help them, you would then refer them to district attorney's office or other places where they could get help?
Yes, the public defender's office.
Okay. And so again, similar to what Ed was saying, that part of the problem, and again, I'm so glad you're on the show today, is a lot of people just don't know that you're available to help, in terms of, words out in the street. But a lot of people weren't even aware of Pisco until somebody told you or told them about you or got you to them. And so if somebody wants to contact Pisco, do they come in? Do they call you on the phone? Do they do via the internet? What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, I would say the best way to reach us is to go to the website, which is pisgahlegal.org. And on that website, they can fill out an intake form. So they can just, click the button that says apply for help, and they can fill out that form. And then someone will call them and give them a screening over the phone. Um, Also, on our website, you can get the phone number for all of our different offices, but they can just call the main line and they can get screened that way. So you can call or you can fill out the application online. You can even come into our office in person, which is at 62 Charlotte Street in Asheville. So any of those ways, people can get in touch with us and figure out if we can help them with their issue.
And talking about Pisco, we should, by the way, to spell it out for people who don't know how to spell Pisco is P-I-S. Wait,
GAH.
wait. Tracy, are you with us?
I am
Oh, okay.
sorry.
I thought we lost the volume there. So you contact Pisco. I guess so the best bet is not just walk in on you. You'd rather have somebody call or make an appointment?
Yeah, it's better if they call first or if they do the intake form online first, because when you come in person, they may not be able to screen you right that second. They may have to make an appointment to do that, just depending on how many people they have in the office that day. So it is better if they call or do the website first, just so that they don't have to come back a second time.
Two questions. Number one, if they don't have access to the internet, and I guess there's some people who don't, they could come in and have form or fill in the forms to do the paperwork in the office.
Yes. Yes, they should call first and make that appointment to do that. So that way, again, like they don't have to come back again.
And what if they don't speak English as a native language?
Well, we can absolutely help with that. So we have a lot of bilingual staff. So if somebody speaks Spanish, we will always have somebody in the office that is able to speak with them. And then anyone who speaks other languages, we have access to this really cool thing called the language line, and we can help somebody in just about any language that they need.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So there, the people aren't in the office, but you have it access as they're in the conversation with somebody. It's very, very cool.
Yeah, Ed, you might know more about that than I do since you work directly with clients, but it's usually like
Yeah.
over the phone or like on an
Yeah.
iPad, right?
It's a really amazing thing where it's a service we subscribe to, not cheap as you can imagine, but you can call, you speak to an operator, you tell them what language you need, and they get you an interpreter. I don't use it that much in my current role, but as a prosecutor in New York, I use it constantly. with the incredibly diverse populations that we had. And you're talking everything from, obscure dialects of Chinese to Eastern European languages, and they'll get somebody on the phone for it. It's amazing.
Okay. And it's the same. So as you're doing it on the phone, I guess you always prefer in person, but it still gives the same feel that they're with you completely.
It is harder, I will say, to work with an interpreter, even when in person. It is more time consuming, and you have to learn how to work with an interpreter in that, you have to make sure you're not going too fast, that everything is being conveyed accurately. You worry sometimes that things are maybe being lost. But I will say that Pisgah, particularly lately, has really tried really hard to make sure that we are inclusive in the way that we serve people. We will not accept that someone is not going to get help because of the language they speak, right? And with West North Carolina becoming increasingly diverse, that's increasingly important. And it does take, an extra layer to serve someone who speaks a different language. But we feel very strongly that it would be wrong to give somebody lesser service because they don't speak English, obviously, right? That would not be fair.
What's the favorite part of your job, Ed?
Telling somebody that I can give them exactly the relief that they wanted.
As opposed to
Uh,
the other side, telling me you can't.
right, which is a lot of it, unfortunately, but I'm very fortunate in that um, I have resources because of the extreme generosity and understanding of Buncombe County government, and because my coworkers have been so supportive and let me try all these new crazy things that no one was doing before. And so to tell a client, sir, I got your DMV record. I figured out that you just owe, $300 in Henderson County, and if you get that paid, you can go to DMV next week and get your license. And then to tell the client, even better, we have a grant that we can use to pay that for you. And sometimes the clients are almost stunned, like they don't believe me for a minute that that's real. And they'll say things like, well, I'm going to pay you back after you pay it or something. No, it's fine. You're fortunate to live in a place where your local government thinks that that is important to do that. That is fantastic. Likewise with an expunction, to tell somebody who's lived for decades, years with the stigma of justice involvements that that is going to come off their record. After they maybe tried in the past and not succeeded, it's absolutely wonderful. One of my other colleagues in communications met a licensed restoration client of mine one time to do kind of some outreach on his story. And after we left, she said, "Ed, you have the best job at Pisgah Legal Services." And for a second, I thought she was kind of crazy. I was like, "You should come with me to DMV and see how you feel about my job." But it did make me think that I do have the extreme pleasure and good fortune to help somebody, along on a journey where they've already done most of the work. Let's be clear, but to get them over that finish line, and I think a lot of attorneys at Pisgah get to do that, but also a lot of it is I'm sorry, there's only so much we can do because the deck is stacked against you, right? So we try to celebrate those wins when we get them, and it's great.
And Tracy, the same question, but now I'll add a kicker to it. So, in terms of what you do, so Tracy might argue with Ed that swear she has the best job at Pisgah. But in terms of what you do, Tracy, what's your favorite part of your job?
Um, I think for what I do, it's really just, I meet people every day who they have extra money that they have more money than they need, and they really want to do something really good with that money. They want to give it to an organization that is going to make a difference in someone's life. And when I can match that person with the work that we do and find something that they're really passionate about that they want to support, it feels really good to be able to make that connection for people. And I love being able to reach out to a supporter and say, hey, guess what happened with your money? And tell them a story about somebody whose life just changed completely, somebody who Ed was able to get a felony off of their record, and now they can go apply for the job they've always wanted, and like that's life-changing stuff. And like to be able to show somebody, like, when you donated $3,000, it literally changed this person's life. That's pretty amazing.
And I never thought about it until you mentioned it earlier, but yeah, that's teaching. You're teaching people that and you're sharing their stories, which is really
Hmm.
cool.
Yeah.
And just listen to stories that Ed was telling, kind of give me a chill. It's just great that who would think that you could affect somebody's life in
Yeah.
an area that they never even thought about. And so back to you, Tracy, in terms of then, if people want to get involved, I guess there are several ways, but I guess they can always make contributions to get involved
Mhm.
other ways as well. So what's the best way to get involved, first of all, if you want to contribute to Pisgah's success?
Yeah. So, like I said before, we fundraise our whole budget every year through grants and through personal donations. So, if somebody wants to make a donation to Pisgah Legal, they can do that by sending a check to us, and our address is on the website, or they can go to the website and they can make an online donation. And it's very easy to do. There are buttons that say donate here. But a lot of folks actually volunteer with us. So, there's also a volunteer button on our website and people can volunteer their time. We have people who leave us gifts in their will. And that's hugely impactful if you're able to leave us some money when you pass away. And then that that's going to continue to support us even after you're gone. There's so many ways for people to support what we do. And we also really appreciate people just talking about us in the community, getting the word out, sharing with their friends that this is a really great organization and this is why you should send them a check sometime.
Or even hearing about us on the Blainsville webcast, like my
That's right.
goodness.
Yeah.
And
Sharing the podcast.
please feel free to do so. And so back to the other part of what you said, so they can make contribution, but they can also volunteer. And so even Ed, in terms of your end or other ends, what are some of the volunteer opportunities within Pisgah? Or Ed, for example, I ask you, do you work with volunteers and work what you do, Ed?
Absolutely, and I
Oh,
depend
really?
on them
Cool.
because I'm a one-man operation, and because I came to this work having to learn so much. I have to give a shout out to the Minnick Law Firm. Their office is around the corner from us on Orchard Street in Asheville. Jake Minnick is a fantastic human being. He does criminal law. He does a lot of DWI defense, and a lot of that is driver's license restoration. So when I started, I got in touch with Jake and he taught me basically a good part of what I know about license restoration. He's a very busy man. I think he has 7 or 8 children. I don't know when he sleeps, but he took the time out of his day and he still does to teach me what he knows, to introduce me to people. Him and his associates do a tremendous amount of volunteer work. I will come to them and say, I have a client who has an issue in another county where I don't get to that often. Can you help? And they'll say, Ed, we're not going to drop everything and work on that tomorrow, but we have a paying client who has a case there in 2 weeks. We'll talk to the DA about your client when we're there. No charge, of course. And they just they do that all the time, and it's absolutely transformative. They've worked some absolute miracles directly with clients in terms of resolving old things and just in the knowledge that they've shared with me. There is no manual for license restoration. I wish there was. If I had more time, I would try to write one, but it's all sort of, institutional word of mouth knowledge. And so having just that exposure to an expert who would charge client maybe hundreds or thousands of dollars for that work to help me do it for free, it has been, it wouldn't work without them, frankly. We have other volunteer attorneys who help with expunctions. We have non-attorney volunteers, students, people in the community who help with administrative tasks. It means a lot to us because we are a nonprofit and we have to be lean and mean. Um,
Absolutely.
that's how I started. That's
And
how I started at
I'm thinking
Pisgah,
out
and
loud
it
with what you
really
said.
made an impression.
And what an opportunity then, if somebody is thinking of becoming a lawyer, to find out what they're going to be doing to volunteer for Pisgah. And so
Mhm.
we'll wrap up with that point, Tracy, in terms of volunteers. Ed alluded to it. So you, of course, and we'll talk about the lawyers that work, pro bono work, and explain that. Plus, you also work with a lot of folks who aren't lawyers. Is that correct, Tracy? Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of volunteers, both attorney and non-attorney. So we do have lots of attorneys who do pro bono work for us, and even retired attorneys who come to us and want to do some work after they've retired. But we also have lots of positions for non-attorney volunteers. They can do, as Ed was saying, administrative tasks. They can learn how to screen callers. They can do, we have a whole other section of our work that includes tax preparation and helping people enroll in ACA healthcare. And those are all non-attorney positions. Those are all volunteers. And we train people to do that work. They don't have to come to us knowing how to do taxes. But we have so many different things, and we have anywhere like somewhere around 400 volunteers helping us at all times, and those are attorneys and non-attorneys. We could not serve 25,000 people a year with just the 130 employees that we have. We need all those volunteers helping us all the time to do that work.
And so to recap, if folks want to get involved with Pisgah, either to make a contribution or serve as a volunteer, or just find out more about what you do, best bet is always to first go to the website,
Yes,
which is,
website has every piece of information they could ever need, including the phone number if they have a question they just want to call us.
and I'll ask you if you would to repeat the website and the phone number.
So pisgahlegal.org, and that is PISGAHLEGAL.org. And Ed, can you tell him the phone number? Because I don't have that in front of me at the moment.
Okay.
I will give me one sec. I'll get the 1-800
Sorry,
number.
put you
No,
on the
you're fine.
spot there.
It's all right. I don't even know my own phone number anymore. That's 1-800-489-6144, and that's toll free. The website's going to have direct numbers for all our various offices, but I don't think you can go wrong with that.
Yeah.
They'll get you what you need if you call that 1-800 number.
Okay. Anyway, I'd like to thank both of you, Ed Treat and Tracey Gruver, for being my guests on this edition of the Blainsville webcast. Also, I'd like to thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti. Hopefully, we'll bump into each other sometime down the road and actually meet in person. That'd be great. Thanks, folks.
That'd be
Thanks,
great,
Blaine.
Blaine. Thank you.
Great.